Hello and welcome to Host Planet Bitesize, the podcast brought to you by Host Planet and Hostfully. My name's James Farley, the founder of Host Planet, and our goal is to share everything you need to know about buying and managing short-term rentals. Today's guest is Mezhiborsky from Autohost, and she's got 5 need-to-know facts about guest screening. Are you looking to streamline your operations and amaze your guests? Look no further than Hostfully. With their top-rated property management software, you can automate reservations, payments, and guest communication all in one place. Plus, their award-winning digital guidebooks provide personalised recommendations and essential information, ensuring your guests have an unforgettable stay while helping you achieve those all-important outstanding reviews. Join the thousands of satisfied property managers who trust Hostfully to grow their business. Visit hostfully.com to elevate your short-term rental game today. Hello, welcome to Host Planet Bitesize. Thank you for joining us. You've got 5 need-to-know facts about guest screening. So let's take it away with fact number 1.
Let's do it. This was really fun to put together. I think it's really evolved throughout the last couple of years. So this was a great list. So fact number 1, which is a little bit of a misconception sometimes, is that guest screening really isn't just one thing. So guest screening would be any and all activities that are related to your guest registration, verification, and vetting of anybody that walks through the door. So it's not always, do I have to run a background check? Sometimes if you have a registration form, sometimes it's not for safety, sometimes it's for an amazing guest experience. But whatever process you need your guest to go through would be some sort of screening. The minimum would be registration, vetting, verification, get more information about them. Any and all of those activities. We'll talk a little bit later about what elements could go into guest screening when we talk about the extent of it. But that's the important part, that anything you're doing as old school or small, or when you get huge and you're running thousands daily, all of these activities are guest screening, and anybody does and really should have something in place. So it doesn't have to be all the way, but you're doing something to vet your guest. You're not just turning a blind eye and handing over keys. So you're screening your guests, and that's the responsible thing to do for any operator. So I thought that was an interesting thing. That was important to know. It's really just like anything you're doing is a transition of a black box and anonymity to kind of safety and transparency. So that's everything we're doing around guest screening.
All right. So first things first then, everything you're doing is a type of guest screening and you need to have something in place. So need to know fact number 2.
Correct. So fact number 2 is that especially as you grow and scale, and that could be from 1 to 3 or 30 to 300, standardization of your process is really a key to avoid loopholes. So we're finding that operators, when they're really small, they try to find these sort of like one size fits all and say that, we can go really strict or really lenient with specific things, and that create gaps. So you could go no one night stays, or I'm not taking booking.com, or nobody under 25. And you can do this, and that would be your better safe than sorry strategy, but that leaves a lot of money on the table. And then on the contrary too, you can kind of come and say, well, I'm not going to screen Airbnb guests, or I'm only going to screen Expedia, or I'm only going to screen certain things like one night on a weekend by a local. And it's just that those types of things end up creating gaps. I know that some operators sometimes want to do it to avoid supposed friction in the guest journey. And so it really is your responsibility as an operator to make sure that, first of all, the screening isn't presented as friction. It should be presented as an incredible guest experience. We're getting whatever we need. We're going to have you agree to stuff. We validate you are who you say you are. Your identity hasn't been compromised, so that you can have a smooth check-in. We can release the information and so on. So in that sense, as companies scale, what we're seeing is that they do not differentiate by OTA or by age of guest or by location. They just really choose to standardize their process. Direct bookings are being brought into the agenda and like the equation, and just standardizing what you're doing across the board is really important. The one other element that you really achieve with standardization is the ethical screening part. So that part is really interesting. When operators are small, they rely a lot on, if you put it nicely, you're going to call it gut feeling. If you put it not so nicely, then we're talking about bias and discrimination. Now, other than that just being wrong, and you're going to accidentally or intentionally decline the wrong guests, that also opens loopholes for sophisticated fraud that understands those biases. And they're going to come off as a really well put through message and an amazing profile picture and a lovely cover story. And so, if anything, lack of standardization and trusting your gut feeling, which I mean, I've done as an ex operator, is something that we see that as companies scale, they really make sure to avoid. So, big important part.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess a lot of that boils down to whether you've got instant book on your, on your OTAs or even on your direct booking platforms. Yeah, standardizing the guest experience. I mean, you'll hear a lot of hosts and property managers, they'll say, well, I will never accept a one night booking on a Friday or a Saturday night because maybe my property's in a built up area and it's going to be a party or something like that. So, yeah, it's interesting. I guess when you do get bigger, though, you've got no choice. You kind of have to have a standard procedure. There's no way you're going to like look at every name and photo and profile and say, oh, well, I'll take that guest, but not that guest.
Exactly. And actually, my favorite example for the one night stays on a Friday is, like my parents live in the surrounding area of Toronto. So we're considered locals. And they might go downtown to a theater or the opera or restaurant and have a few glasses of wine and decide last minute to just stay at a hotel or stay at an Airbnb. And by all means, take their money, right? Like that's not the reservation that you want to screen out just because you're saying no one night stays on a Friday. And that's where kind of fine tuning your screening a little bit better would be really beneficial for your bottom line.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you're refusing everybody, I mean, we know from being hosts and property managers, 95% at least of guests are great, and it's only a very small percentage that are causing problems. All right then, Ella. So, need to know fact number 3.
Number 3, so I mentioned this before, but in a different kind of capacity. I said that guest screening really isn't one size fits all. So you're not going to implement a process when you're at 5 to 10 properties and have that same process remain all the way through. So first of all, something is better than nothing. Just like having a sign on your door saying beware of dog, even if you don't have a dog at first, is better than not having that sign. So get started with something. You don't always need tech. You don't always need in-person check-ins. You might be starting with that. As you grow, you can move more towards an automated process. You can introduce more screening. You can remove human element and trust, say, software more, or you might, kind of go, I'm going front desk and I need to screen everybody and I need somebody to look at people. But either way, and it's something that I'm hearing also from clients that have been using us as they grow, they do take that time to reevaluate their processes, see if something needs to be tweaked, either automated better or something wasn't working in their criteria, and just keep your kind of pulse on it to see, is it working well? Are you avoiding the damages, the risk, the issues, the fraud, the chargebacks that you're hoping to avoid? And at the same time, are your guests happy with it? And are you really achieving what you needed to achieve with being a responsible operator? So based on your size, look at what's out there and what you should be using, be it internal staff or tools that are available. But definitely make sure that you reevaluate as you scale your portfolio.
Yeah, how much is guest screening a constantly evolving process?
So it really is, because you start with, when you're small, you kind of do in-person check-ins and your gut feeling is they look sketchy or they don't look sketchy. And sketchy is not a good criteria. I mean, I've done that and I've been burnt with it. But then, yeah, as you grow in scale, you run into you have a team with people and they have their biases. So one agent that's, mind you, a guest support agent, their job is to make the guest experience amazing. They're not bouncers. They're not supposed to be gatekeepers, but they kind of are forced into that role a bit. So arming them with some more standard procedures, if and then decision trees, later down the line, some tools that let you collect the right information, do the verifications you want to run, from be it ID verification to social to background checks and fraud and device. And there are so many things you can check to make sure that the guest is who they say they are. But definitely utilize those things as you grow bigger and you have to handle a higher volume, because you don't want to be holding your fingers crossed. That's not a strategy.
Yes, even though you might be doing that from time to time.
Yeah.
Okay then, Ella, so need to know fact number 4.
Let's do it. So especially in this day and age, it's extremely important, and that no matter your size, is to educate yourself on data privacy and security. So we recently just saw this come up with Airbnb's new policy, but just in general, regionally and countrywide and continent-wide and worldwide, you need to be aware of compliance with privacy laws, especially, by the way, if you're not at first using certain tools, and being aware of, so PII is personal identifiable information. So if I collect some information about you and I have James Varley with a picture of your ID sent to my email, and my email gets hacked, that is where liability kicks in. There's examples of companies way bigger than you'd assume, where for a very long time they would just write down credit cards of customers for a security deposit and just write it on a piece of paper or in a journal or into a form. So as you grow and as your liability grows, being aware of the fact that, yes, you're asking for identifiable information from your guest for your and their safety, but it's also your responsibility to make sure that it's encrypted, it's guarded, you're using a safe service, that the reason why you're doing it really is for your mutual protection, and therefore privacy laws come in. Then there's things like how long you can keep the information and deleting it, and tools that you use will take care of that for you. If you're not using tools, just awareness is really important, and whatever tool you are looking into, making sure that you're remaining compliant, that you're not liable for any data breaches or information in that sense, because you want to get the benefit, but obviously not be on the hook for any issues arising. So data privacy is really important, and as fraud online grows, it's becoming a real concern.
Yeah, it's something you have to be careful of, and it's going to change depending on what location you're in. Even if you're out here in Europe, you have to think of when you're storing people's email addresses, you've got to be GDPR compliant and all that kind of thing. So yeah, think very carefully about data privacy and security. Is really, really important. Okay then, Ella, so fifth and final need to know fact.
Let's do that. So the fifth one is something that it's something that we're terrified by, but it keeps us running and going. It's the fact that guest screening is something that's evolving and getting more and more sophisticated. So if I look at a few years down, kind of back, we would see situations where companies won't accept locals. So, local gangs would realize that they can have, a friend in a different city make the booking, but then pass the information. So it's almost like there's always loopholes that are being found. So fraud is, there's different types of fraud, but let's just kind of say that anybody you really don't want to be walking through the door and who's lying about their identity or intentions, let's call that a fraudulent reservation right now, whether it results in a chargeback or not. And so we found very early on at Autohost, for example, and that's what our R&D is focused on, the more exploits and the more ways you have to do this, we need to always stay on top of it, be it recording devices that are making multiple bookings, or there was a period where reservations were made and then sold on Kijiji as triple the costs, or parties are happening. So that was back then. And now we're reaching the age of bad AI. So AI is now going to be the driver of so many incredible things. But we in hospitality also really need to understand that those gut feeling strategies that we once had, like, oh, the message sounds sketchy, or let's ask them something, or let's distract them, the messages are no longer going to sound sketchy. Everything is going to be lovely and coherent. Everything is going to have an incredible cover story. You take that to the next level. ID images can be fabricated especially for the human eye. Selfies, biometric scans, there's so many of those things where you can go deeper and deeper into finding a way to fake it. Now, my favorite recent one that terrifies me to the core, and I'm a little happy that I'm no longer an operator, but we want to do whatever we can to help operators, is that way back when, if in doubt, it was like, we'll just call them. Just call the guest. Judgment, just give them a call. You'll see if they're a normal person. You'll see if they're fine. And so we're now talking about voice-activated chatbots. We're talking about you being able to have a coherent conversation with somebody who you think is Julia Johnson that's booking, and it really won't be her, but the bot will, and she's not even going to mumble, because the bot will be given the instructions of what's the story, how to answer. They're going to think on the spot way faster than you can. And so we're getting into, on the one hand, it's terrifying, but it's really just our responsibility to be aware of that evolution of the risk. And just the more data points you bring in, the safer you are in knowing that the guest really is who they say they are. And we have the benefit of, with all of this happening, guests should be aware and understand that we're doing this for their safety as well. And so in terms of cooperation, you're talking about instant booking. A lot of the verifications is kind of presented as a registration. It can happen after the booking to avoid friction. But those types of things is something that operators also need to be aware of, that it's a little harder to know if the guest is, who they say they are. And it's on us to make sure that we're not just turning a blind eye and handing over the keys to anything from gray area issues, from parties, vandalism, noise, rule compliance, and then all the way to criminal activity, gangs and drug smuggling and escort services and sex trafficking and ending up in chargebacks, and that fun list goes on.
I'm thoroughly frightened, but at the same time excited for your business because there's a lot of scope there for new technology in this space. Just before we kind of chat a little bit about Autohost, just tell us what the big OTAs are doing in relation to guest screening. So what are Airbnb, what are Booking.com doing every time they take a booking, and how secure are those bookings, and how confident can you be as a host that they're actually genuine people?
Okay, so it's interesting. I'm gonna have to be like a little bit politically correct about this, just because the OTAs are claiming to be doing a lot, and it does differ, and they alter what they're doing. So, for example, Airbnb is known and thought to be the safer of the OTAs, just because they're doing more on the guest registration side, the review system. Having said that, you need to submit your ID at the beginning of the creation of a profile. And so it's one of those loopholes where it's a perceived safety, and sometimes it really does work, but sometimes for more sophisticated fraud, it gives way for the ability to, like, lots of examples where kids are being paid off to open an account with a supposedly real ID, but then you don't really know who it is that's booking. In cases like Booking.com, for example, which is, notorious for people that have their red line, no Booking.com reservations. I'm passionately against that because it's such a beautiful platform. They're doing so much to bring reservations in, but their KPIs are turning lookers into bookers. Like, they have zero interest at the end of the day to add friction on behalf of the operator to stop any fraud from happening. As years went by, they've introduced things that sometimes they are the merchant of record. They've been processing some payments. So Booking.com has been making some attempts towards that. Expedia is somewhere in the middle there. So again, whenever you're the merchant of record and you need to make sure the payment goes through and the person is who they say they are, the responsibility is still on you. You bring direct bookings into that mix, and that's kind of where you really want to know who's staying. And then at the end of the day, if payment doesn't go through, that sucks. And if payment does go through, but something that is not legitimate happened behind closed doors, are you as an operator okay with it? Right? So that's where kind of I brought in the point of standardization, even though things do differ. For example, Airbnb's policy, which is really focused and they want to keep their money. So the point is less, don't ask guests for anything, but they're saying they want to make sure payments go through the system, that you're not taking them away from the platform and so on. But even in those cases, the attempt really is to help the guest and, avoid that friction. We as operators need to find that balance. So yes, you can choose to, if you're using any tools, you can choose to disable things based on which OTA and channels they come through. But when you start looking at a game of numbers, you just want to even out the playing field. So they do some things and they compete for that, and it's constantly evolving. But in their best interest is to kind of get as many reservations through the door. That's what they're competing on. And we as operators, our job is, to keep our business safe and thriving.
100%. Yeah. So tell us about Autohost. Where do you fit into the guest screening enterprise?
So, in a nutshell, I actually come from the property management kind of side of things at first. And so Autohost is a guest screening platform that used to be an internal tool that we used. And then we just realized really that the industry needs it yesterday, and there's so much to be doing. So we integrate into many of the marketplaces and basically handle the entire guest screening process, start to finish, from hi James, thank you for booking, to, like I said, there's an array of things. So you can go as simple as guest registration and just collect ID to have on file, and then all the way to validation of IDs and biometric scans to make sure it matches, social verifications, fraud assessment and validation, device fingerprinting, running background checks, credit checks. So you can go anywhere on that spectrum as you need, depending on your, requirements, contractual, and whatever that is. So that's what Autohost does. And then the really great news is that we previously have kind of exclusively worked with operators that are 25 properties and up, and we're integrated through many of the marketplaces or API, but now we're really working with quite a lot of both PMS vendors and guest apps to really make sure that screening is embedded in their platform. So my biggest thing is, whatever it is you're using for your guest journey, make sure that screening is a part of it. Many are powered by Autohost. So it's just something that we're really passionate about, just kind of powering the industry and making sure that we help even out that playing field.
Sounds great. And where can people go if they want to find out more information about Autohost?
So, definitely visit our website, autohost.ai. We have a big knowledge base with lots of information and really great tips. And then following us on LinkedIn is usually great because be it our technology, new updates, industry news, definitely a great source of things that we often share.
Fantastic. Ella, thank you for sharing all those 5 need-to-know facts. I'm a little bit scared, but also I feel like I've learned quite a lot as well. So thank you so much for joining us on Host Planet Bitesize.
Thank you for having me, James.
Great to chat to Ella Mezhiborsky there from Autohost about guest screening. Yes, it was a little frightening, but that's why it's so important to get this right if you're a short-term rental host or property manager. All right, that's it for today's episode. Remember, this series is sponsored by Hostfully, and if you'd like to try their PMS or digital guidebook, head to hostfully.com. For more free education, tips and trends from the STR industry, visit hostplanet.club, where you can sign up for our newsletter, listen to our podcasts, and download a suite of ebooks for hosts and property managers. That's it for today's episode. Until next time, happy hosting.